with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Rich, man, we got a great show today. Lots to talk about. But, one thing that's just, this is summertime, right? And everybody's thinking about vacation. Isn't that wonderful? People are thinking about vacation. And I've been working on a couple of trips, actually, heading to Seattle and Portland this weekend, and then later in August to Denver. And to rent a car right now, it's ridiculous. And what we're paying to rent cars right now is ridiculous. And finding cars to rent, if you're even lucky to get one, it's ridiculous. And then the whole thing about buying cars, there's just no cars to buy. I mean, what's going on with that? You've seen what happened to the real estate market. And I mean, there's just no inventory of homes in many parts of the country. I mean, just everything is selling. But then when you look at automobiles, can you imagine, back during the pandemic, I mean, the automakers really got hurt. I mean, people weren't traveling or going out of their houses. Why would you buy a car? And then all of a sudden this thing turned. And think about how many jobs in entrepreneurs and small businesses are somehow connected to the auto industry. I mean, it's massive. It's huge. And then the auto industry that supports people going on vacation and, having these wonderful times and family times and so forth. And now you're spending a lot more even to get a car, if you can get a car, whether you want to buy it or you want to rent it. Very, very incredible thing going on here, Rich.
Well, the whole market is radically changed. I mean, not only that, the used car market is just going through the roof as well because they can't get used cars, and they need cars because the car dealers want to sell cars. So everything has really changed. This is a horrible time to buy a car. My son wants to buy another car because he just sold his used car. His second car was a used car from his cousin, which he sold for $2,000 more than he paid for it less than a year ago because he thought it was a good opportunity. But you can't get a car out there. So it is an amazing situation. It's a situation that has been, to a degree, and we're going to learn about this from our first guest, brought about by whatever reason. But there are no chips. That's one of the problems with the new cars.
Supply chain. And we hear that in every industry right now.
Mercedes is in big trouble right now because those are the folks that I know. The Volvo people are in big trouble right now. GM, Ford, Fiat, and so forth, Volkswagen. Something has really gone wrong. And I'm looking to find out, what do we do about it? And I'm waiting for our first guest. Tell us.
Well, our first guest is here, Nik Miles, who is the auto expert, and his website, ourautoexpert.com. He's a broadcaster. You see him all over the place. He's got a Fox Sports show. He's on NBC Sports, a number of morning shows around the country, and he is joining us right now. Nik, welcome to Made in America.
Hey, gentlemen. Thank you for having me on.
So can you tell us what is going on with the auto industry right now as far as just producing cars? And is it a chip problem or is it much bigger than that?
It's really a hard landscape to understand. So trying to bring some clarity to what's really going on. It's not one thing. It's Newton's third law of for every action there is an opposite and equal reaction is not true. In this situation, there are 1,000 actions that have resulted in new car and used car shortage. And they're linked, obviously, because as new cars come onto the market, cars become available and then go into the used car market. But it's the chip is the one thing, the chip shortage is the one thing that everybody's focused in on. So the pandemic caused several things to cascade and then evolve into the chip shortage, including the coronavirus shut down factories where chips were being made. These factories have workers that came in from the outside. They were in groups, in rooms, and those groups, although they're very air filtrated and everyone wears clean suits, that doesn't necessarily filtrate out the virus. So factories got shut down. to stop the spread of the coronavirus. And the majority of those factories are in Asia. That's where those chips are made. Therefore, they were the first people to suffer from that, China, Japan, and factories got shut down. Following that, because people weren't buying cars at the beginning of the coronavirus, these factories reverted to using their facilities for other things. And chips that go into not just cars, but computers and video games and laptops, the things that people were consuming. And because of the change of direction, then there started to be a chip shortage, lack of production, change of direction, and now we're feeling it in that car market.
Has there been, is there an increase in demand? Is that also driving it? Or is the demand basically been stable? It's just production isn't keeping up with whatever the demand, but it's a normal demand?
Yeah, I think that, we had a lot of people not buy cars for anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on what state that you lived in. And that causes pent-up demand. You already talked about it at the top of the show. Somebody sells a car, somebody's waiting to buy a new car. That demand is like the dam is full of water, and not just water, but everybody's pushing to get out. And so what suddenly happens is there was no trading happening for 18 months, and you'd scheduled it, or your lease had become due, or whatever the reason was, and then suddenly you've been waiting for 6 months to a year and a half to buy a car. You can't wait to get out there and buy one. So it was really a buildup of pressure in the market, and now we're seeing that pressure explode. There just isn't the inventory there. Car factories were also shut down. We just see the demand is much higher than the availability, and that's the same in the chip industry. It's the same in the new car industry, and then trickles down to the economics of the used car market.
Well, okay, this is quite interesting, and it really does have amazing unintended consequences that most people weren't thinking about 6, 7, 8 months ago. But let's go out a little bit. In terms of the car market, all the great deals, and when I get a car, Neil and Nick, I usually get it November, December, and I try to do it in December, about every 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. Because that's when the best deals. They want, the dealerships want to make their numbers. Everyone's pushing for end of the year deals. If you have a lease, Mercedes, for example, will wipe out the last 5 months of your lease. Literally wipe it. They don't roll it over. They wipe it out. That's how they keep you. It's called a loyalty program, and that's why you get stuck with another Mercedes or whatever. So the point is, let's put it in italics and quotation marks, Nick. So, but let's look out 6 months from now. Do you think that we're going to be in a position 6 months from now when people are really looking because maybe their leases are up? I mean, God, you can imagine your lease is up, you got to get a car, and you can't get a car. That is a very strange situation. So in your Nostradamus mode, Nick, what do you think is going to happen come like November, fourth quarter?
So I don't think we're going to be any better off than we are now, but it's more chilling if you look further out. So it's going to take about a year and 14 months to a year to resolve the chip issue. That's how long it's going to take us to catch up and make sure that we have chips ready and available. And by the way, some car companies are already making sacrifices. A perfect example, BMW looked at what on their vehicles people didn't want and didn't use. Perfect example, the kick open tailgate. They deleted that from their vehicles because it saved on chips. And therefore, they didn't have to put an extra chip in the vehicle to make sure that that feature happened. So car companies are making adjustments. But let's walk ourselves out through the next, let's say, 15 months. In 15 months, let's just say that we're back to normal. There's inventory in both the new and used car market. People are able to go out and buy vehicles. But what happened between now and then? If you're paying, and I'll give you some extreme examples, these are not common everywhere, but they have happened, a used Hyundai, let's say Palisade at a Sacramento dealership they were asking $20,000 over sticker for a used one. How much it would be worth? They were asking $20,000 more on that.
Are you kidding me? I mean, that's outrageous. I didn't think it was that bad. Wow.
Yeah, these are extreme examples, as I said. So let's be a little more conservative in our estimate. Let's say that you paid $3,000 or $4,000 more for your vehicle today than you were expecting to pay for what you wanted. Let's jump to 15 months into the future and then say, did I lose that money? Is that vehicle worth it? Let's say in 15 months you want to trade it in, or in 15 months you're going to sell that vehicle and buy a different one. Are you going to take a hit of $3,000, $5,000, $20,000 on that car because you paid more than you wanted to and the prices have equalized? Buying a car right now could cost you a loss of $3,000 to $5,000 if the value of that vehicle shrinks down to what the market should be without a chip shortage and without new and used car shortage. So there's bigger risks than just paying more now. What you pay extra, you could lose in 15 months if car prices go back to normal and nobody's willing to pay what the extra that you paid when they're buying your used car off of you. So there's a lot of consequences to think about. Even though the market is expected to return to normal, will you lose the money extra that you paid a day? And that's a question, unfortunately, I can't predict.
Well, that's a very interesting point. An incredible point, because when you come to floor planning cars for dealerships and they're working with the finance folks at the banks, that whole model may have to change to account for what you're just saying. Very intriguing.
Major disruption in the market.
God.
Hey, Nick, we're out of time. We really appreciate you being with us. Nik Miles of rautoexpert.com. Check him out. Really good. He gives you great intel on cars. Takes all the emotion out and makes it all very factual. Very good. Nick, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to talk about something really positive, really exciting, lots of energy. It's about private space exploration. I mean, I think this is incredible. A lot of jobs going to be in this segment. We've got to grow it. America has got the innovation. We got to win it. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Welcome back to Made in America. We're really happy that you're with us. Space, the frontier that we're all dreaming about right now. I got to tell you, Rich, whenever I see anything about Mars, I see anything about space, I'm just completely drawn to it. It's so fascinating, and you see these photos coming back from Mars. I mean, what an incredible thing to actually see one of our vehicles, kind of racing around and collecting all these samples, and just absolutely blows me away. The movies too. I mean, they're getting pretty good at making movies on space right now, but this is not anymore, fictional. I mean, this is really happening. We're sending people to space. Now, okay, they're just kind of at the sort of the frontier of space as they get out of the atmosphere.
Well, we've kind of retreated for the last few decades to the lower space orbit, because for a while we were leaving that, and we were going with the whole idea was to get to the moon, and we were brought up with that. It was very exciting to go from the Mercury to the Gemini to the Apollo, and then to, what was that word? Nothing. We just let it go for a while, which is really sad. But what's very exciting, and I got to tell you, I think Stanley Kubrick really encapsulated the whole thing with 2001: A Space Odyssey, because he commercialized space. That was the whole idea. When they left Earth orbit, they went to the platform in space, which was the hotel. It was a Hilton Hotel on a Pan Am rocket, which of course is not here anymore, and then wound up going to the moon. Very exciting stuff, and I am delighted that we have Terence on the show today, because this is a wonderful topic. And I got to tell you, I think this is a great economic environment, a new vertical that we can invest in, because it's the future of mankind. That's how I feel.
And that is the exciting thing.
That is.
The entrepreneurial privatization of a space program. And, Rich, you said it. Terence Kealey is joining us right now from the CATO Institute. And he was also a biochemistry lecturer at Cambridge University. And so he knows this topic. He's very good at it. He's published on it, published a piece recently in a national review and about the private sector really advancing the whole exploration of space. It's just absolutely fascinating. The entrepreneur is taking over. That's the way it should be. Terence, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us about the whole space thing for really since the beginning. Entrepreneurs, privatization, private companies has always been a part of this exploration, but now they're taking the leadership role.
Yes. In fact, space was inaugurated, the exploration of space, by the American private sector. It's often forgotten, but the real hero of space is a man called Goddard. And he's not completely forgotten, because sometimes when you see clips of NASA ships out in space, you often see the word Goddard written on them. And one of the NASA museums is named after Goddard. So he's not completely forgotten. But Goddard in the 20s and 30s was an extraordinary pioneer. He was at Clark University in Massachusetts and largely funded by the Guggenheims, very generously by the Guggenheims. They shouldn't be forgotten either. He basically invented the modern space rocket. He invented liquid fuels. He invented gyroscopic regulation and direction. He invented multi-stage rockets. He invented the whole technology. It was the most extraordinary achievement. And the only reason we now associate space with the state, whether it's the Germans with their V1 or V2 rockets, or whether it's the Americans with NASA, is because space essentially got captured by the military. So you were talking earlier about how wonderful it was that we had Mercury and Gemini and Apollo and all that. But one shouldn't be naive about what those were about. Those were about John F. Kennedy being frightened by the fact that the Russians had beaten the Americans to space. It was the Russians who launched the first circulating artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. It was the Russians who put the first man into space, Gagarin, in 61 or 62, I can't remember, one of those 2 years. And this really worried the American government, who, amongst other things, worried that the Russians would now have the capacity to nuke America from space. And so NASA was created in 1958, immediately after the launch of Sputnik, specifically to beat the Russians in space. It cost truly vast sums of money. America was spending billions of dollars at a time when billions of dollars was very valuable on putting men, because it was a sexist age, putting men on the moon for no other purpose than to ensure geopolitical advantage over Russia. And that's why in the end it stopped, because once you put men on the moon a few times, that was the end of that geopolitical exercise. It was always a military exercise.
Hey, Terence, we got to... Terence, hold that thought, because, I mean, this is really fascinating, really great commentary. But Rich and I'd like to, follow up on a number of things here, and especially how the space entrepreneurs of today and what do you see their future is, and will we get to Mars and all of these things? It's really fascinating to our audience. We're talking with Terence Kealey. He is from the CATO Institute. We love the CATO Institute. We've had a number of folks on our show. He's also a lecturer on biochemistry at Cambridge University. He really knows this stuff. Stay with us. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're together with Terence Kealey. He is from the CATO Institute, having a wonderful discussion about space and about the entrepreneurial takeover of the space program, the privatization of space. Very fascinating. So, Terence, tell us what do you think about the future of space, and how historic has been these last couple of launches, the last few launches of these three really great entrepreneurs, one British, two American. It looks like the space program right now is completely in their hands, but the Chinese now are getting involved, and you say about how in the beginning it was the Russians and the Americans in the potential military asset that space could be, and now you got China now, and I don't think they're going up there for tourism. I think they're going up there for economic or political dominance. So how does that play into this? I mean, does America have another challenger in space that could be used against us in a very, very unscrupulous way?
Yes, I think we cannot be naive about China. China's motives are not necessarily totally philanthropic. I think China is a threat actually to the Western world at so many different levels. But you're absolutely right. We are seeing the huge privatization of space exploration, which is a very good thing for the taxpayer. But we're also seeing other players like China coming in. And so what I'm afraid, and you're going to groan when I say this, but the only way we're going to, and in fact I groan saying it, the only way we're going to handle this, I'm afraid, is we're going to have to start having some pretty serious international treaties and international regulation of what goes on in space. For a start, there are an increasing number of bits of metal whizzing around the globe, essentially almost a form of pollution. And we can't allow that to continue to accumulate, because eventually people are going to die when one of these things hits a manned mission. So we are, I'm afraid, going to see the Wild West era of space eventually come to an end as more and more billionaires and trillionaires get into it, and as China and other, I mean, that one day India will want to have a significant space mission, as other countries come into it as well. So it's going to start looking like the United Nations. But today, as we talk today, we have a huge, there's no question, the last few years has seen an extraordinary privatization of space. And when historians look back on this era, they will mark this era with these three trillionaires as showing a huge break after 40, 50 years of the state player and the state acting, particularly the American state. Suddenly it's being broken over by individuals. And that is a very good thing. They're going to get much more innovation, much more original ideas. I mean, you see the Branson, for example, launches his space mission from an airplane, a very different technology from the other technologies. We see that SpaceX has this extraordinary capacity to land carefully back to where it came from, an extraordinarily beautiful piece of engineering. We're seeing much greater innovation than ever before. We're seeing much more originality than ever before, and we're seeing less pressure on the American taxpayer. But it's going to get messy out there, and eventually there will have to be international regulations. But for now, let's have fun as the private sector moves in.
Well, it's sort of like the Wild West. I mean, Wild West was uncontrolled for a while, Dodge City being an example, and then eventually Law and Order came in. The Earp brothers were around. They did their thing, but we got it under control. I think what's interesting, and I agree, I think the private sector is probably the best thing that ever happened to space for a couple of reasons. One, private industry recognizes schedules, they recognize R&D, they find ways to make things happen, and they're very conscious of the bottom line. Whether it's a Musk or it's going to be, Jeff Bezos or your fellow.
But it's a commercial. It's a commercial
It's
enterprise.
a business, and I think that's a good thing. Look for an example. What took us from 1908 and the Wright brothers, and 50 years later we're having shrimp cocktail and martinis on a 747. That was not just the government, which, yes, they did right away, because next thing we know in World War I, we're dropping bombs, from biplanes. But it was the private sector providing the product that was necessary to fulfill the need in the private sector to get people from A to B effectively, efficiently, and quickly. And that pushed it to become reality. What do you think, Doctor?
I think that's even more important than I think you said something very, very important that's often overlooked. Because actually, the Wright brothers in 1903, as you point out quite correctly, when they flew, they were actually competing against the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian Institution had a grant from the Defense Department of something like, the sums changed. It was initially $50,000 in those days, of course. It became about $76,000 because they were worried about fighting the Spanish in Cuba, and they wanted to invent a military aircraft. So the Smithsonian had something like $76,000 from the American Defense Department, or the War Department, the Army. The Wright brothers, with only 1% of the money, beat the Smithsonian to the air. And that is a classic example of the private sector being more entrepreneurial, more technological efficient, and much, much cheaper. No one talks about this aspect of things. It's very hard to get the message out in this world today that we don't need the state for technological advance. And every time the state does something, we are told repeatedly, oh, only the state would have done it. But in fact, as things like the Wright brothers and now space, not just originally with Goddard, but today show, if you leave the private sector alone, it'll do it quicker, faster, and cheaper.
Well, Terence, we could have been talking about this for a lot longer. We'll have to get you back.
We had to get Terence back. He must come back.
Yeah. A great topic, and you're so eloquent when you talk about it. Terence Kealey, he's from the CATO Institute and also a former lecturer of biochemistry at Cambridge University. Terence, thanks for being on the show.
It was a pleasure.
Coming up, we have Sebastian Arcos. He's from the Cuban Research Institute and also a professor at Florida International University. And we're going to talk about what's going on in Cuba. Very, very fascinating.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Well, Rich, you know, we're the show of hope. We are the show of opportunity. American entrepreneurialism, small business ownership, putting it all on the line. We represent those folks, the risk takers, the inventors, those who are pursuing their dreams. And thank God that we live in a country where we can pursue our dreams, because I think we take it for granted. We take it for granted in the United States that it's always been this way. But let me tell you, I lived in Asia for 20 plus years. You spent a lot of time in Latin America. The fact is, it doesn't exist in many places of the world. These opportunities don't exist in many places of the world. It's bleak. It's dark. There's no way out. And when there's no way out, people become desperate, and they do desperate things. Why? Because it's their families. It's their children. What are they going to do to try to make a positive impact on the lives of those that they love and that they're so concerned about? And we see that happening in Cuba right now. I mean, people taken to the street. And in this regime, this regime is a terrible regime. What they do to their people. So to be out there, I'm looking at pictures right now, and these people out there waving the Cuban flag, they're very proud people. They're very proud of their country, and they should be. But they're not happy with their government. And I think this thing is coming to a head.
Well, it is an amazing situation that we see. And you're right, we do take it for granted. And we have free will in the United States. To a degree, we have free will. You don't have that everywhere. You certainly don't have that in Cuba. So when you're saying that people will take risks for their family to go forward for their children, what they're really doing is finding a future for their family and their children. Because you can't have what you want in Cuba the way it is ever since Castro came in. And if you live in South Florida, and we do, and I've been in Miami, in the business world of Miami since the 70s, late 70s, and I have witnessed the incredible change that we had as a result of Castro taking power and declaring he was always a communist. We saw that change, and we saw the people come. The first wave of the professionals, and the second wave, and the third wave, and the Mariolitos in the 80s, and the impact that had, and the continuing struggle for freedom, which we take for granted. But yet, the Cubans have all this desire and this wonderfulness to achieve. And you were talking about people who want to have the American dream, have a dream for a future. I can't think of a more powerful group of immigrants coming to this country than the Cubans that are here and came from Castro's environment. The most incredible people, just doing wonderful things for the community, and wanting, and this is important, to do this on their own. So I'm very excited about our guest.
So we're very pleased to have with us Sebastian Arcos. He is he's at the Cuban Research Institute at Florida University in Miami. Sebastian, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
So Sebastian, what I'm thinking is that I don't know, there's 2-point-something million Cuban Americans. There's 11 million Cubans on the island of Cuba. But you look at the economic success of the Cuban American community, and they're not, from an immigrant group, I mean, they're not like overly successful, but they've been very successful. They built wonderful lives. And they're not unique in the United States, is what I'm just trying to say, is that many groups like the Cubans came to the United States and they performed very, very well. But imagine what would have happened in Cuba if they stayed and they were given this opportunity and they did all these wonderful things like Rich was saying about here in Florida, and they were doing that in their own country, that they were doing that in Cuba. I mean, just think about how much better Cuba would be right now. But they came here because they felt they didn't have a choice. What do you say?
Well, all you have to do is look at what Cuba was before Fidel Castro came to power in 1959. And I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. Cuba was a third world country. Cuba was a country with inequalities, sometimes very visible inequalities. Cuba is a restless nation and politically very restless, and we had a couple of dictators. But overall, in the 50 years of Republican time, when Cuba had a Republican system with democracy and elections, regular elections, the country always moved forward. Even if you go back to the colonial times, in the early 1800s, Cuba was considered by a British scientist who traveled throughout the Caribbean as possibly the richest colony in the world. That continued during Republican times, despite all the political problems the country had. The country always moved forward. And by 1958, Cuba was a country that was at the head of Latin America and most socio-economic indicators. And for example, if you take infant mortality, in Cuba had better numbers than France at the time. It is surprising, but it's true. And there are books written about this with all the data from the United Nations, from the tables and all that. Cuba had one of the largest middle class in Latin America. That's why that's the only way to explain the significant development of television in Cuba. It was very common that most people had a TV set at home. Telephones, automobiles, everything that came out of the U.S. consumer society ended up in Cuba very, very soon. And Cubans were used to that. But they got involved in this revolt against the military dictator, Batista, who was economically competent, but politically very incompetent. And on top of that, he had violated the Constitution, the 1940 Constitution, and he started killing people left and right. So Cubans revolted and got rid of him and put all of their hopes in this bearded guy who came down from Sierra Maestra, because he had promised a return to democracy, a return to capitalism, progress, the 1940 Constitution, and all that. And they were betrayed. He imposed communism in a matter of 2 years. He kicked the United States out of the Cuban economy and sided himself with the Soviet Union. And then, of course, blamed the United States for everything that went bad, when actually everything was the result of his own personal decision to change the course of history in Cuba. And that's why we are today.
Well, Sebastian, hold that a second because I want to talk about today. I mean, what is going on today, and what you think is the outcome of this, and could this be the beginning of something new? Stick with us, folks. Sebastian Arcos from the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. We'll be right back.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're together with Sebastian Arcos from the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. Well, Rich, I'm going to bring you in first. I mean, what do you think? Is this the beginning of something new, or, I mean, let's face it, the Cuban government has got an iron fist. I mean, and they got all the secret police.
Yeah.
I mean, can these people survive? I mean, look what happened in Hong Kong. We love Hong Kong, right? And then, you know, the communist government comes into Hong Kong and they just decimate the press. They decimate everything, any sort of dissent. I just saw something here. The UK is, you know, offering refuge to people from Hong Kong because it's gotten so bad. And they should, by the way. They should. It was their colony. They should. Mm-hmm. But what do you think? I mean, are they going to squash it?
Well, I got to tell you something. Having been there quite a bit, and recently in the last couple of years, there are three types of police that are there. You don't want to mess around in Cuba, and you don't want to get arrested. I did not see anything like this when I was there. I haven't seen anything like this in years. I do find them to be enormously courageous to get out there. My God, they're flying their own Cuban flag, and they're flying the American flag. They're wrapping themselves in an American flag, demanding freedom and democracy and equality on island. So I want to ask our guest, how significant do you see this, that this is actually happening, and isn't this something that you think that we should capitalize on from our government to encourage them to come here, or don't you?
Absolutely. What happened on July 11 is simply unprecedented. These were the largest, more widespread public demonstrations, more openly politicized demonstrations that Cuba has seen since 1959. There is no point of comparison here. They were completely spontaneous. There was no organization or coordination here by any actors, whether inside or outside Cuba. It just took place spontaneously and then spread out like wildfire all over the island. People were out screaming and chanting for freedom and down with the Communist Party and down with dictatorship. No one was asking for bread or vaccines or anything else. No one was chanting against the U.S. embargo. They were chanting against the regime. These were openly anti-regime demonstrations. And they broke an important psychological barrier that is common to all totalitarian regimes. People believe, because of years, decades of repression, that it's impossible to go out into the streets and that is useless, is futile. Well, this barrier was broken on Sunday. It was broken for good. It cannot be fixed. This is a watershed moment, and it's the beginning of the end of the regime. Even if it doesn't happen tomorrow or next week or next month or even next year, it marks the beginning of the end for the regime, because people have reached an end to their patience and their understanding of what the government said. They just don't believe what the government said.
Right. This is definitely a watershed moment. I think the genie's out of the bottle, And not only that, you're 100% correct. It didn't just happen in Havana. It happened in a number of places in Cuba at a relatively the same time. So this is a great example of how people are demanding the rights, their God-given rights to have a life. And I do think this is a very important, moment in history. But how do you feel about when and your family came here? How do you feel about, the Department of Homeland Security in Mayorkas telling the Cuban folks not to come here? It's not worth it. I mean, how do you feel as a Cuban American?
It was bad enough coming from a Cuban American himself. I can understand the political context. I think the administration is trying to stop a Maria-like uncontrolled migration out of Cuba, and that's an important thing to do. But it's also important to signal to Cubans that there is hope in the horizon and that the United States is on their side. That is what the administration ought to be doing.
Well, yeah. And also the Marielito thing was different also because, Castro was emptying out his jails. He was relieving pressure by doing that and allowing a number of people to come here. So I think, going forward, and we're almost out of time, it's going to be very interesting and exciting, particularly being in South Florida and for the rest of the United States to watch how this plays out. And if, in fact, this is the moment that we cross that red line, so to speak.
Well, Sebastian, we really appreciate you being on the show. Unfortunately, we're out of time. In fact, we're out of time for the entire show. But, folks, we've been with Sebastian Arcos from the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. Well, Rich, we're out of time, but we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.